Hello, people. This week I read The Tragedy of Benedict Arnold. This is a subject I think in my head I feel like I know more about than I did. All I knew for certain was that Benedict Arnold was a dirty, rotten, traitorous pig. But I didn't exactly know why. So I'm like, let me grab this book. Let's see what it's about. The story is very interesting. What I think this book does wrong is it's too many names, not in the sense of you can't have this much, it's too complicated, but I just sort of name dropped and assumed everyone understands what that means. So when you say like Yale College, I just assume everyone understands that Yale's this big time thing. And it's a lot of the characters as well. I say characters, it's a history, so they're real people. But I think the author thinks that that's well known enough and that it doesn't, it doesn't deserve or it doesn't warrant a retelling or something to this effect. We'll go through whole sections and it'll be like 7 different names. Now, of course, they're all early part of the country, founding father energy. These are known names. People who started, the state of Pennsylvania, etc., etc. We're right in the roots of everything. But I didn't know some of it, and some of it I couldn't follow along. And then it gets muddled in those points. See, we're here for Benedict Arnold, and if George Washington affects Benedict Arnold, then you can take a moment and give me something about George Washington, something about etc., etc., etc. This is the problem. A lot of his nemesi, antagonists are not described enough. The landscape isn't literally the land itself, not just the political landscape, but the land itself isn't described enough. The politics isn't described enough. It makes the assumption, I feel, or maybe it doesn't make the assumption, and maybe the publisher wanted it shorter. I'm not exactly sure. I can only judge what I get out of the book, and what I get is not enough. So in that sense, if you know a lot about history already, I guess you can follow along well enough. I think a lot of Americans get a lot of early American history in their schooling, and they might follow along better. But even at that, I'm pretty on top of some history. And some of the names, well, it's not even that that you lose track. It glazes over in your mind, and you start to not listen. This kind of energy happens. I'm not saying he's wrong in anything he's presenting. It's a history. I believe every bit of it's true. But, this is the issue I have with it. In that sense, it probably could have been 2 or 3 times longer, and I might have had more enjoyment out of it. Also, and I kind of get why, but there's a lot of battle. There's a lot of battle described. We went this way. We attacked that fort from that direction. This kind of thing. And he seems to enjoy that part a lot more. It's a lot more detailed than some of the other bits. But it loses the weight on account of, again, the lack of sort of connection you have with the people involved. By the end, when Benedict's done traitoring, you do feel a little sorry for him. He's the one you've covered the most, but you could have felt it a lot more. History can give you that. You don't have to be, such a slave to the exact facts that you're afraid to tell the story of the history. So, that's what I would say. I'm pretty sure, I'm fairly certain you can find way better books on each of these people. I think if you had a book on each of the main characters, then sort of read this one, it'd be better because of the other ones. That's what we're looking at. His early life is, I think, a well-established family in sort of the Boston area. His dad ends up a bit of a booze hound and, losing a lot of money as a merchant, i.e. you get a boat and you go do stuff with a boat. You move rum here to there, flour here to there. This kind of thing made money then. I suppose it still makes money now, but there were a lot less rules then. But he failed at this. He squandered a lot of the money, so your young Benedict Arnold didn't get the benefit of what should have been a solid schooling. Instead, he had to be helped by family friends. He started an apothecary sort of situation. He was an apprentice, which those can last a long time. I think 7 years, something to this effect. He figured out how to be a pharmacist. But in the midst of this comes the French and Indian War. And he goes and gets involved. And in the course of this, I think there's a sort of a hidden element here to this as well as the revolution. And that element is Indians. So here, they teamed with, whoever's in charge, teamed with Indians as well. And you're like, well, that didn't seem like a problem. I'm like, no, it's not a problem. Except that Indians have a different idea about war and have different cultures and situations. So you're with these people, the Connecticut Provincial Militia. You're essentially British. That's your sort of lineage. I think they're British citizens at this point. You win the fight, and these Indians, I think at the time, would ritualistically eat their opponents afterwards. That's a rough one. Especially rough if you're, sort of a British gentleman angle. You're not trying to see, prisoners of war mistreated. I mean, yeah, I guess you could kill some of them, but to watch them get eaten, that's not a good situation. And so that, you can see that instilling some sort of disillusionment in a younger person. 16 years old, 17, however old he was. Not a good situation. And I feel like this comes up again during the Revolution, wherein the British use Indians, who of course will scalp people horribly, and that then makes peace sort of unattainable later on, where if you just sort of fought British versus British, you might have had a lot more people be okay with sort of the peace negotiations they had. Because sometime in the Revolution, they offered a lot of the things that the revolutionaries were asking for. Representation, lower taxes. They just weren't going to give them independence. But after you see, Indians go ham on your people, and the British don't care at all. British being a solid mixture of British and German troops, you start to see where things go sideways. But it's interesting that I didn't know he had fought in that war, and I didn't know he had seen these things. And if you're in a ye olden day, very honor-driven society, I mean, I'm talking, he grew up in an area where, like, the priest was like a semi-judge and would rule on how people are acting in town. So, like, you cursed this lady. You said a curse and this lady heard it, so, we're going to censure you or give you what for. And he's like, I hit my thumb with a rock and said, son of a biscuit, this rock. And he's like, you can't say no son of a biscuit here. What are you doing? Inappropriate. This kind of your priest is running the town energy, Puritan energy. But you can't have a cat who grew up like that see some Indians eat some people and be okay with it long after. So, I mean, this sort of floats in your head. He grows up, he starts a pharmacist's business, sells it, and then sort of goes into privateering kind of like his dad did. Only he was much better at it. He's a very dynamic person, very headstrong, very manly man. These are the stories of when he was a kid. He would hunt rattlesnakes for a bounty. He He would defend the young, the smaller kids, always against the bigger bully. He's that guy. He really is. Even making money. He was well-to-do because of not slave trading, I don't think, at this point, but your selling of sugar cane, of rum, etc., etc. Not easy, especially when French and Portuguese and Spaniards are all out on the water, and if any of them catch you, they'll just take your stuff. So it's a very hit or miss, kind of like the oil industry today, wherein you can, strike it rich or just be destitute in a matter of days. This kind of energy. Now, the book does give you solid details. What is it? Him and Ethan Allen, wherein he has around him people quick to take credit, whereas he, in the way he wants to be a gentleman, he's not quick to take credit or ask for advancement, and you can feel these things sort of sour him. So he'll show up to some battle, and his guys aren't there yet, or he was having to do the legwork, and somebody, as soon as the legwork's done, and Ethan Allen shows up and is like, well, I'm higher ranked than you because I'm Continental Congress. This kind of energy happens to him a lot, but this isn't new to these types of situations, especially in this era, 1700s, 1600s. It was, and it's wild to read about because I'm used to modern armies. In modern armies, it's just, volunteer, very quiet, behind the scenes stuff. I'm sure there's politicking that goes on, but back then it was fairly blatant. And it was about grabbing some glory for yourself and making sure everyone knows you did a thing, and maybe turning that into other good monetary gain for yourself. It's very strange to see, but it wasn't unusual. So he had a problem dealing with it. He didn't adjust to that thing well. You can go the route of you just let your achievements show for themselves and suck everything else up, or you get in and fight the dirty fight. You got to do one or the other. And he really didn't. He expected people to act more right than they would, which is never a good situation to end up in. What is it? He helped seize Fort Ticonderoga. He led another fight on another fort. And afterwards, because he didn't like, Ethan Allen and this whole situation, he resigned because, it's like, I'm out. I'm not going to do this anymore. And on his way home, he learned his first wife died. And so I feel like, a little bit lost. He said nasty stuff to the Congress, and then he's like, I apologize for saying all that stuff. But can I get back in the army? Of course, they let him in, but some politicians ain't going to forget that mess. The Continental Congress was very much involved in a lot of the crap that he did, which, it stems from part of the reason they're going for what they're going for. A lot of you seeing, the British had aristocrats. The British had the buying and selling of commissions. This is literally, if you're rich, you buy in, you pay, and your son just becomes a general. I paid that much, you make him a general. He don't know anything that he's doing. I think the ideal was that they literally buy into the program. If you spent this much money, you'll be inclined to make it work. You assume aristocrats are smarter and educated. And I suppose that for a while it works. The British are a long-lasting empire. But by the time we're here, we have a lot of people who are jaded by it, who want a merit-based setup and are very afraid of sort of, authoritarian military types. So the politicians have a natural resistance to what Benedict Arnold is becoming, which is a popular general amongst the masses. And they it leans on that part of them that doesn't like, dictators. And so they're constantly at odds with that energy. And then, of course, you then have your snakes that come in because they don't like how your Benedict Arnold talks to him, because he's a no-nonsense kind of guy. So instead of being able to deal with politicians politically, he doesn't relent at all and makes enemies. So then when the snakes show up and say, make me a general in charge of that fort over there, they do. And so now next thing you know, Benedict Arnold's seeing these cats who haven't been in a fight, who don't know what they're doing, who haven't done any of the legwork, coming in and getting ranked over him. And then he constantly gets called to the mat about, how you spend this money and where'd you do with this and why are you asking for that? And he's sitting there going, I had to use my own money to pay my troops and y'all haven't even paid me in 2 years. This kind of energy is constantly going, and it's going on for years. This is building. Multiple court martials, which again, at that time, it was serious, but not like now. Like now it's like you brought a court martial against a general. It's heavy news. Whereas there it was a mechanism to sort out an issue. But it did require, we're going by horse. So you go from Canada down to Philadelphia, or one of these other areas, and then you got to bring in a bunch of other officers. You can't do that during the summer because all my officers are at war. And so now I'm half the year it takes to wait for the court case. Then everyone shows up. Then we yap about it in the cold. And then it turns out they all agree with me and I'm right. You do this 3 or 4 times, you get kind of annoyed. It makes sense to me. Another thing I didn't know is that he quickly understood that we needed to, I think he helped take Montreal. He's like, we need Canada. If we don't own large parts of Canada, then it's always going to be a feeder in for the British to deal with our stuff. So he led, I think he got shot. What does it say? Shot assaulting Quebec City. He helped take Montreal until, of course, the British sent too many and then they had to lose it. Even in losing it, he had quickly built up a mini fleet. Oh, hold on. Before that, I think he personally led a march of men up into Canada. They marched in during the winter and fought. And then, of course, he had to march out with them, getting harassed. This is hundreds of miles in the snow, right? Legendary march. I think at some point also he helped make a fleet, and he fought in Lake Champlain. Now, obviously, the British had a better fleet. They didn't have, they had bigger, better warships. But he fought them off for a while because he's good tactically. But, of course, he ended up he lost that because it was outnumbered, like 2 ships to 1 or some mess like this. But it bought a lot of time. I was wondering at this point, if he had made himself an admiral and said, give me this amount of section, give me this amount of autonomy, I'll build you some ships, and we can keep the fight going against the British. If he'd have campaigned to be an admiral, I think he would have worked better off, because I think he needed that excuse, that buffer zone. There's a lot of times when admirals get in trouble, but they're on the other side of the world, so you can't really get to them yet, and by the time you can, and by the time they get back, the situation's cooled off a little bit. Also, only a certain amount of cats want to go out to sea that long anyway. So I think it would have worked out better had he ended up becoming an admiral, or at least asking for it. You gotta ask sometimes. But he never did. Now, I think at one of these, 2 actually, he's had multiple horses shot out from under him. He got shot in the same leg twice, which gave him a limp and laid him out for a while. So, by this time, he's well known by the higher ups. Washington's, almost a friend who knows him that well. Becoming a legendary general, but he keeps, ruffling people's feathers. So they make him. Washington makes him the governor of Philadelphia. You run this while your leg's messed up, and that'll be good for you. And I need someone to run it. And they say this is a bad idea, that, he's not the right man for the job. Because it's a city with its own issues. It's sort of occupied So we're not letting certain businesses function because there are too many loyal to the British there. But in the course of running this, he allows certain businesses to run so that he can make money. Again, not unusual for captains and generals to make money in this way. Washington was doing it. They were all doing it. They were all highly concerned with, being destitute for doing this good thing and freeing a country when, politicians who didn't fight at all would get rich. They didn't think that was right, and a lot of people wouldn't accept it. But the politicians used this, right? So they got him on one more court-martial, trying to explain these things, and he was certain his other officers would see it his way. But they didn't. And it was two minor, charges of slight improprieties that weren't going to be that big a deal. But he did not take it well. He marries, this might not have been the best decision, but he marries an 18-year-old Peggy Shippen, which, again, not unusual in those days. I guess not unusual now still. But she's more loyalists in her leanings than her family is. So they think maybe this also put these ideas in his head. But I think it's the other part. I think it's, marching to Quebec and losing dudes in the wilderness and all the hardships he has to face and making me go 150 miles in the snow on a bum leg for a dumb court-martial when I paid my troops with my money and y'all ain't paid me. This kind of energy really soured him. So then after this final court-martial and they're like, you're guilty, here's a slap on the wrist, he's just fed up. He's fed up and he just starts plotting the traitorous acts that he does. And at first it's a lot of, the British don't seem to be too good at this, to be honest. I feel like Russians are a lot sneakier in this regard. They make better spies than some British ones. The British too nice, or something's wrong. I'm not. In any case, it's a lot of letter writing. It's a lot of him trying to make sure the money's right, and them being, coy about it, not trying to put too much down. But he gives a lot of details, a lot of information. He helps change some battles. And we get to the point where I need something big. I want to, we want something big as the British, and he wants to do something big and pull this pin. The big thing he wants is to give them essentially West Point. At the time, it's not a military academy at that point. It's literally a fort on the water, sort of positioned well to hold off, the Hudson? Whichever river it is. It's just positioned very well. And if you defend it, it'll be a tough nut to crack, as they say. But if you have an inside man, it'll open the gate. It'll be a coup for the British. So now it's this hot mess of trying to do this communications. On one point, he's going to talk to General Clinton in person, but the ship doesn't know it's him, so they shoot at him, and his guys don't know he's trying to turncoat, so they roll away from getting shot at. It's a hot mess. Eventually they meet up, and they sort of form this agreement. We set everything up like we want, and this dumb British officer, I think named Andre, he's Clinton's guy on the scene, and Clinton's like, okay, don't wear your uniform, don't do anything dumb. And he's like, I'm going to wear my uniform and I'm going to do dumb stuff. That's essentially what he does. He has the whole plans and he just shoves it in his boot. Of course he gets caught. Of course they see him with his weird British coat on or whatever. Of course they get the plans. And they see it all laid out. At the same time they caught this, George Washington's visiting West Point to see how things are going. It's going horribly bad. Nothing's done right. He's sort of shocked at the state of West Point. And so he's like right there, and Arnold's here, and this guy catches it, and he's like, oh my God, he must have stolen this from Benedict Arnold. I'm going to run this over to him. He runs it over to him, and Benedict Arnold's like, ah, crap, my crap's gone to crap. And he's like, thank you for telling me this. Don't let anyone else know. I'm going to go talk to George Washington about this. And he goes right to his wife, like, honey, I'm going to the British. I will see you later. She's like, you're a turncoat? He immediately YOLOs out, so they don't catch him. But they got Andre. And so they make a big point as to, do we hang this guy or not? They didn't want to. Half of them didn't want to. The other half are like, I got to. He's a dirty spy. And his argument's like, well, I was only doing what my country said. I'm like, yeah, well, you killed some of our spies who were only doing what their country said. This kind of energy. He's like, can you at least kill me like a soldier, and just shoot me? They're like, nah, I gotta hang you, which he wasn't happy about. Seemed like a good guy, just a moron. Just a moron who ruined everything for Benedict Arnold. In any case, that went south, and then everything went pear-shaped. Because you had one of, if not the most known of America's generals who had won multiple battles heroically, leading the charge himself, this kind of energy, just completely turncoat, and they just couldn't square it away. He got fat stacks for it. He got annual pension of $60,000 and a lump sum of like $1 million. I make something like, whoa, it paid him out good. British had all that. Didn't they have India by this time? I'm not exactly sure. They had a lot of cash, and then he had a lot of cash. In his defense, he did offer to exchange himself for the spy who got caught. Which would have been a heroic ending for him, but Clinton didn't want it. He didn't allow it. I think they were still in the mindset of maybe I could use Benedict Arnold to turn more officers in America, because they were British too, back to the British way. And it sounds crazy, but in the time it wasn't. In the time, even your Hamiltons were very not wanting to not be British, if that makes sense. It was very much, they're like, this got out of hand, and if I could just get peace and be back to British, I think I kind of would. And then of course the other half were like, nah, we're not doing that at all. But it was tenuous. It's a lot more tenuous than even the book describes. And so I can see that as one of the reasons why your Benedict Arnold goes turncoat, because that's the big question. Our author doesn't make a solid statement as to what he thinks the reasoning is. You would think this would be more of a focus of the book. It's really not. You would have think that, that to go, the Civil War is killing us. That's not good. I still see myself mostly as British. And to see that Continental Congress from the inside, to see that they're constantly petty, they're not putting the best man ahead. Even Washington has to fight them a lot of the times. You must have heard things from Washington as well. And to say that maybe we don't want to give this thing over to this type of a person, and that it would be better. And it doesn't seem like as much of a turncoat if you see yourself as British as well, as he was raised. He was raised a British citizen, essentially. So it's not much of a turncoat in the mind in that sense. Especially if sort of defending Connecticut and honor were the reason he was going. To see sort of dishonorable people in charge, I can see that being like a big turnoff. In any case, that's essentially how the book ends. There's some afterwards, but I didn't read it. I do think it could have done better there. I know they put him in charge, actually, of some units, of some soldiers, some British soldiers. They didn't like him, but what can you do? He still won battles for the British. I think it might have also been better for him if he could have become friends with Cornwallis and sort of rolled with him, because he ends up in India, I believe. And I think Benedict Arnold would have done fine there. Instead, he hung around Canada and England, and no one really liked him. But he's also sort of hard-edged, so it's easy for him to make people not like him. Weird confluence. But it's also wild that it's still an interesting subject today. This dirty traitor. He seems less of a dirty traitor after this book. He seems very heroic. But again, I wish the book had done more. I wish, I didn't get enough of a sense of the land, of the energies, of the politics. But what can you do? But this is my first choice in ad revenue. These happen to be my books. You can buy them. You can also get Kindle Unlimited, and then it's sort of like a Spotify for books situation. Now remember, my books are completely made up, so nothing in them is true. Take that how you will. Okay, people. I will talk to you a lovely lot next week.